cold and windy outside, and yeah, I really can't say much else. Transphobes are still assholes. Exceptional radio. All right. So today we've got a return guest, Mr. Dennis Childers. You may also remember him as Snark, and he's one of our favorite Twitter personalities. How are you doing, Dennis?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
So, this is actually like the second time we've had a in-studio production since pandemic. And it's kind of strange, to be honest. It's actually kind of, it's nice, of course, because I can see the people that I'm talking to. But we've had this veil of interference, this obfuscation layer, in a sense, for the past couple of years. And it's really strange.
Yeah, I think I had been used to remote for a while, so it wasn't like a really difficult transition for me. I'm not sure if it doesn't necessarily feel the exact same when it's remote, but I feel like as long as you're able to keep the most important parts of conversation, it's like you lose the gestures, but you don't lose the context. That's where I think there is this element of like, it is slightly different, but I think you have to sort of adjust your expectations. And if you don't, I think adjusting expectations is one of the big things that people have a hard time doing. Not just with like going from physical to digital, but like I've been thinking about the notion of like a sequel in terms of when a property is successful, there's this notion of like, oh, we should further the success by making a sequel out of it instead of, besides Avatar, I don't know how many stories were planned in their like trilogy or however many are in the, maybe Harry Potter, what's it called? Song of Fire and Ice. There's some out there.
George R. Martin. What do you think? Game of Thrones?
Yeah, his original story. He hasn't even finished it yet, but it was, and that's, I think that's the problem, is there's this notion of like trying to rush an ending when he hadn't finished the book series. So like the people who are in this the passive consumption of visual media gives people the notion of like, as soon as I'm done consuming, the sequel should be ready. And because of that expectation and the way seasons work, they had to rush the ending for Game of Thrones before. I thought it was Song of Fire and Ice, but whatever the name of the series is.
Yeah, that's like the subtitle of the series. Yeah, Song of Fire and Ice.
Like before that gets finished, those people want an ending, and because they don't want the story that George wants to tell, they want the story that they started watching on HBO, and they want it to complete. And I think it's the same type of person. It's like flashes in and out.
Oh, that's because the noise gate was fucked up on me.
But then it's like the people who are unhappy with The Sopranos, and when the Sopranos were like finishing, it it went along with the series, but it also didn't go along with the culture of passive consumption in terms of like they don't want ambiguity. They want something that's very clear. And that's why like the David Lynch Twin Peaks type stuff doesn't really work for mass audiences because they want a clear ending. They want a tight bow to wrap their story up.
It's interesting. I think that you're tackling a lot of people's inability to accept that they will not necessarily have closure in a story.
Mm-hmm.
And the method of storytelling in film in the past has been where you've had these beautiful, ambiguous, vague endings, and they've never touched the film again, or even a series. And then you have the phenomenon of something ends like that because of bad writing. And I think we've conflated a good ending that is a mysterious ending with a bad writing ending.
Yeah.
And it's a very fine line sometimes.
It's hard to know too, and I think I go back and forth in terms of like specifically David Lynch and where I'm like, is this him copping out or is this him including that ambiguity of art? And I think sometimes the ambiguity feels like a cop out if it's not done intentionally, but he does it so intentionally that I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But like with The Sopranos, it wasn't that type of art up until the last episode. So you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but they weren't doing that type of ambiguity until they had to. I've found as someone who's written songs, it's really hard to write an ending. If you write a song, a story, the middle and the like climax are not difficult, but closure is really difficult to find. And whether it's like a song or a film or a TV show, and writing it is really difficult. And I know personally, it's like you can do it in a trope way just to finish it, but you want to do it in a way that respects what you wrote in the middle was doing. So sometimes I can see like a story is going a certain way and the ambiguity helps that story continue after the story's over, in terms of like when a story gets closure, there's no real question after what happens in the audience's head, and that's where the ambiguity leaves the audience with the responsibility of filling in the gap. And I don't think a lot of Americans specifically like that responsibility, which is why they lean on passive media. So when passive media presents them with something that forces them to be active, they reject it. And I think that's what happened with The Sopranos in terms of like, if you're going to do that, you have to sort of, can't just drop it on the audience in the last episode. You have to allow them to be active earlier on. Like Sherlock, for example, like the BBC version, the audience gets a lot more capacity to get involved in terms of like, if you look at some mysteries, you can't really solve like if it's a television series, they don't actually present the audience with enough information to be able to solve it by the end of the like resolution. But Sherlock gives you enough of the pieces in terms of like, you may not see it the first time around, but then after you see the resolution, you're like, oh yeah, they actually gave us all the pieces. And in that case, you can go as a passive audience member, or you can attempt to solve the case alongside the show. So there's this element of like, all television is not passive. The same with film, But in that, I don't think the active audience necessarily represents the entire audience. So that's where, even with the shows in which you have activity, there's going to be people who passively consume. And I think those people color interpretation because we don't know. If someone's giving their opinion to something, we don't know how they consumed it. We don't know if they consumed it passively or actively until they get into their explanation, if they even go that far. So I think that's where you have a lot of consumers that are non-discerning because they're consuming passively, not actively. And that's where the passive consumers, I think, are tinging media production in a way that is going to, it's going to result in a bunch of, it already has resulted in a bunch of bad media created, but I think we're going to go through this period where like that audience will be appeased by AI writing because they're not that discerning. They will be appeased by AI visual stuff because they're not discerning. They will be appeased by AI music. So as long as those people exist, mediocre media will be able to be produced and pawned off onto them, but also they don't represent the most discerning perspective. So I also, in looking at how things are shaping, like when that guy submits a AI generated image to a photography contest and wins a photography contest, that's not AI, that's deception. And this is something I think people are having a hard time discerning in terms of like, when we're talking about the Turing test or even the Loveless test, when we're discussing the capacity to trick someone into thinking that a computer is real, the basis of the Turing test is all about deception. And that was why ultimately they started to create the Loveless test, which was focused on creativity. But what didn't get taken into account is if people were not honest about the creativity, that level of deception makes it appear as if the AI generated works are as good, but that's because someone was given false information. So if you present me with the song and you're like, hey, this is something I wrote and I take you at your word because I trust you, then you're like, wait a minute, actually that was AI. Isn't AI good? On the one hand, it's going to color how that person feels about what they thought, but people aren't going to like being tricked like that. And I think what's going to happen is there's this element of, in order to prove the validity of AI creativity, a lot of that trickery has to go on. So on the one hand, it's going to appear for like 6 months or a year that this AI is tricking people, and it's like, oh, you couldn't tell that wasn't a real Drake song. You couldn't tell that wasn't a real Weeknd song. Well, that may be true, but it's because it was presented under false pretenses, and now people are going to be more discerning about that type of thing. And that's where I'm like, I don't think it is going to result in the same type of AI quote unquote creativity. Because then, did you see that they're talking about, like, someone did an AI created video game mod in Skyrim where ChatGPT basically like remembers what has happened and will spit out dialogue.
Wow.
You say wow, but then you go read the dialogue.
That's not a good wow.
And it's all really bad. And it's like, once you actually read what it's saying, there's an incident that happened where someone got an arrow to the knee and then every subsequent character starts referencing this arrow to the knee. So it's like it remembers things, but it doesn't understand context well. So it's not going to be able to construct a contextually meaningful story. Yet it may happen eventually, but it's nowhere near that to the point of like the way it's being framed as if the creativity is like on par with humans. Those things are being said by non-discerning consumers and by people who are being tricked into thinking something is actually made by a human when they're preparing to give an answer. Because I think the issue is we are more likely to be critical of a AI generated object because it doesn't have feelings to hurt. Whereas if you bring me a song and you're like, hey, I wrote this, I'm not going to try to hurt your feelings out the gate. I'm going to try to find all the good things as someone, not to say that I wouldn't think critically, but that's not what I would say in terms of like, that's not the cool thing to do. You don't, if somebody brings you their creation, you don't shit on it. Unless you're a douchebag. And this is where the notion of like, if someone's paying me to be critical, that's different than a friend asking, hey, what do you think of this thing I just wrote? And that's where when I'm paid to be critical or when I'm asked to be critical, I'm the most abrasive.
Yeah.
I will cut everything down because this doesn't need to be here, cut it out type person. But that's when I'm asked to be that. If I'm not asked to be that, I'm not trying to look like that when I'm not solicited. And this is, I think, where Americans have a problem not soliciting or not volunteering unsolicited critical opinions about things that they're not specialists in so frequently that then when people start talking about, oh, that's a good Drake song, what the fuck do you know? What the fuck do you know about music theory? What the fuck?
That like is America sorted in the real world and on social media. This idea, don't come unless you're invited. Mm-hmm. And also on that, kind of going with that line of thought, if you solicit someone's opinion or, oh, what would you do if you saw this or saw me, what would you do? You really can't get angry unless there are totally out of hand responses to those invitations. But then again, like I said, it goes the other way. It's like, why did you come in here like the Kool-Aid man? You just shut it, just go away. And we can't, and it goes what you had said, that the whole nuance and context, and it's in writing, whether it be in film, literature, music, it seems like that is like a battle cry, context and nuance. Because what I can say in one conversation, it can be either inappropriate or not needed at all, but very much needed in other, in situ, to use an archaeological term.
Well, I also think people have a hard time knowing when to shut the fuck up, too. And it's like, okay, I was just at a event. It wasn't my event. It was for my partner, and people would like talk to me and like ask me questions, and I would answer them, but just enough to answer the question and not be rude, because I'm not there to talk about me. It's not about me.
It's your partner.
Yeah, so I need to shut the fuck up and not like, again, not be rude to the point of like not responding to people, but it would, like, when people go to things that aren't about them and then make it about them, it's so fucking weirdly narcissistic that I don't think people grasp when it's like, hey, if you're not actually the center of attention. Oh, for example, my dad's birthday party. He like gave me the mic to talk. And I'm like, this is your fucking party, man. So I like said a couple words and I handed it back. And it's like, I could not imagine a universe where I'm like taking the mic and then going off on a fucking, oh, I remember this and that, and this is what this person means to me, but then go on for like 10 minutes and like take all of the energy in the room. And because I got the center of attention for just as long as somebody handed it to me, then I'm gonna take it and just take all of the energy possible. But that's like, that person is so, I can't tell if they are unaware of themselves or don't care. It's like
They don't care.
I mean, it's hard,
They
it's
don't
probably
care.
it's probably both. But it's like sometimes they feel so aloof that it's like, does this person really not know that they're sucking all of the oxygen out of the entire fucking room?
Years ago, I was at a wedding, and it was a good friend of mine. There was 12 people present in the actual wedding party, and everyone was standing up and saying something like, "Tien, say something. You've known Nick the longest," right? And so I stand up and I say my little spiel, and it was short and sweet. And I remember asking before, I said, do you actually want me to say anything? He's like, man, if you want to, go ahead, but please don't make it a soapbox. And his new brother-in-law took like 10 minutes and got political, and it was so weird. I mean, it's like beyond weird. It's a place where one should not go.
Yeah.
But I think that's a cultural thing. I think some people have a modicum of sophistication, and other people are just, I don't know, what's a crude word for a hammer?
The funny thing is, the entire thing that made me think about this premise is, on the way over here, I saw this sign at a church that said, "Heaven has strict immigration laws, hell has open borders." And I'm like, I'm thinking about reporting this motherfucker for political involvement to get their tax shit revoked. I'm not actually going to do it, but you're not supposed to be political when you're a church. And that is so overtly political in a sign that they put out in front of their church, where I'm like, what possessed, what fucking bumblefuck goddamn preacher thought this was a good idea? He's sitting there, I'm gonna show these liberals with this sign. They're gonna drive by, these fucking liberals gonna get so triggered, all these snowflakes. And I'm like, who thought this shit was a good idea, to the point they went to fucking Kinko's or wherever and printed it out, took the time to put it out in front of the fucking church, where I'm like, this is... And it's wrong. Well, and it's just wrong in terms of like the idea of heaven have strict immigration. No, you just fucking literally accept Jesus and you're in. That's the thing I had a problem with as a kid.
And the infuriating icing on that whole damn cake is they probably think it's cute and funny. That phenomenon of like, oh, look at this. It's so clever. And it's like, you're not clever. You're not funny. And it's, well, asshole-ish.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not a Christian. I just happened to actually read the Bible when my parents made me go to church, and I wasn't listening to the pastor. So if you think about the crucifixion story, he's accepting the repentance of those fucking criminals that were dying alongside of him. So it's like, no, they don't actually have strict immigration law. It's literally the easiest fucking thing to get into heaven. And that's why when I was like 5 and hearing that story, I'm like, this can't be right. You can't, like, if somebody does all this horrible shit and then they just say these magic words and then you let them into heaven, that's fucking stupid. I always thought that was stupid as a child, but that's what they say. That's in the Bible. So when these people are like, oh, there's strict, no, there's actually not. So it's not even the fact that they're being political. It's the fact that they're being incorrectly interpreting their own fucking text, and then being political on top of it. Yeah, it's like the amalgamation of the bullshit is like
it's theological groundwork is all wrong. I mean, I studied theology when I was in college at a Catholic university, my first year of university, and it's astounding how.
I bet everyone there was wearing clothes made of different kinds of textiles.
Well, and that's what I'm bleeding into. Is like when everybody, and this also goes into Chris. This whole idea at my grandfather's funeral. Obviously, anybody who's seen for more than 5 minutes, heavily tattooed. I start to get a lecture from the minister that my grandfather had known for years about tattoos in Leviticus. And the only thing that kept my mouth shut was it was my grandfather's funeral. I was about to tear into him. I was like, you're wearing mixed fibers. You've shaved your face. I bet you had a hamburger with cheese on it. Do not fucking lecture me about what Leviticus says if Jesus' advent and coming abrogated and wiped away that slate in the book of Leviticus. Either you follow Leviticus or you fucking don't. Don't lecture me about Leviticus. Because, and that's outside of the fact.
Did Leviticus have tattoos?
I don't know. Well, it is forbidden in Torah to have tattoos. The only exemption is if Holocaust survivors who have their numbers. But obviously that was by force, so that is that's forgiven in Jewish law.
Do Christians abide by the Torah?
When it's convenient, yes.
Basically, like that's where the Abrahamic religions overlap in some of the stories, which is where their interpretations and then subsequent how they define the prophets is where they branch off in terms of like Jesus is a prophet to the Muslims. It's just it doesn't go the other way. Like the Christians don't recognize Muhammad, and like the Jews don't recognize Muhammad like as a prophet, but the Muslims recognize Moses and the Christians recognize Moses because it starts from like the Abrahamic.
Yeah. So, well, Christianity likes to borrow from other. It borrowed a lot from like pagan religions, and whatever the.
It's not really Christianity. It's a Christian national or imperialism.
Christianity is like almost analogous to Rome in terms of appropriation.
Well, if you look into the Mithras cult, that was popular among Roman soldiers. Very striking similarities. I can't start naming them off the top of my head, but to get credible sources, you can see the similarities.
Their names end with Cleese and
the Mithra cult, and even saying that, I think the strain of Christianity that we have specifically in the States, right out of the gate, it fails to recognize in situ Yeshua. Jesus was a brown guy from the Middle East. Politically, by nomenclature, modern nomenclature, he would be considered a socialist by the standard that's set of his behavior in his time period that was written down.
Well, okay, let's get this some more context, even in terms of like the reason the British church is separate is because I think Henry V wanted divorce to happen. So that's the only reason they exist. And then the only reason American Christians exist is because they were too crazy for the fucking British, and those Quakers were like basically kicked out into America. So it's these crazy fucking witch burning.
Well, the British didn't like the Puritans. Yeah, so the Puritans were fucking gone. They're like, we don't want you either.
So like that's where I'm saying in terms of like the American Christianity is rooted in being too ridiculous for even British Christianity. It's literally too absurd for the British Christianity, so they got kicked out. So
yeah, I don't know. You growing up too. I mean, my family was Christian. None of them were like ministry, but that turning point when you see Christians learn that whole rapture doctrine is less than 200 years old. Their eyes just go. Like they don't know how to deal with themselves. And I can't remember the fellow that created that broken doctrine predicted the end of the world twice and was obviously wrong both times. But yet people still cling. You'll see paintings in different churches and books.
Nostradamus?
No, that's the Italian guy. Way older.
Yeah, Nostradamus.
But also inaccurate.
There's been Christ, or not Christ, but Armageddon. Suggesting pseudo prophets like basically every 100 years for like the last 2,000 years. And it's a matter of like the ones that we don't know about just didn't get enough traction to make a historic like impact. But even then, the one with Jesus is not even from his direct impact on people so much as it being used as a tool of manipulation, which is why it's so disingenuous for people to, like, once you learn the full context of where and when Christianity got popular versus when it was supposedly existing, and then understand like what was happening in the rest of the world during that time period, then it is clear that all these religions were used as a means of like culturally unifying people in the same way that coins were. It's like the coin with the face of the emperor or the face of the king or whatever is basically the extent of an empire. And that's the way that nationalism and empires worked in a time before actual nationalism really emerged. So that's where, like, the notion of us having Christian nationalism in America today, it's completely natural in terms of the evolution of both nationalism, Christianity, and religious or national identity go, but a lot of it is rooted in those people not learning history, not wanting to learn history beyond the Bible, and then having their frameworks constantly given to them. So there is this element of the people that we are dealing with being such sheeple. I mean, their religion is literally built around them being sheep. But those are the same people that want to act like they're gonna fucking go fight against the government. It's the most disconnected fucking cognitive dissonance in terms of like what they say to themselves on Sunday or what they have people telling them, and how Jesus is their shepherd and they're the sheep, versus the like American eagle, I'll fucking shoot everything, pew pew. It's Prince of Peace, fucking Uncle Sam of war. And going back and forth between those two extremes has made that population unpredictable, but also in ways that are predictable in terms of like, they're only going to either like lash out violently or have some weird kinky secret that is the reason that they act out the way they do. It's very binary in terms of how they bottle these things up, but you never know, like with like George Santos. Oh, now we find out he's got a whole drag thing, and it's like you never know how it's going to manifest, but you know it's going to manifest in something.
That just made me think of something from my past. Years ago, one of the struggling through post-traumatic stress disorder from my military and combat experience. One of them was a spirituality group. Dr. Gatton had run it. Brilliant dude. And one of the dynamics that you just mentioned, here I am as a kid, and even if you are not religious, if you don't claim Christianity, we are still so inundated and formed by this broken cultural experience. It's like we've got Jesus as a Prince of Peace, and then you got to be all fucking John Wayne and tough guy and kill shit. And one of the focuses of this group was that dynamic, which really impressed me, which really helped me to get through a lot of that. This idea that in the American mold, of that particular American mold, Jesus is supposed to be X, but Jesus is Y.
So,
and you have to, you're trained to be a killer, but you're also trained that you're not supposed to be. And it just, and it's like this, it's like all across the board, this weird, they can't accept the nuance of what an actual warrior type is. They've got to do this weird compartmentalization of dehumanizing their enemy. Right, whatever they perceive that enemy to be.
Recently in Texas, within the last couple of years, I think they passed a constitutional carry measure, which allows anyone over the age of 18 just to carry firearms. And last week, some dipshit is out on a date, gets scammed by some fake parking lot attendant.
I heard it was $40.
The guy charged $20 per person, and so he gets to the restaurant, and the guy, his server is like, "Yeah, that guy doesn't work for the parking lot." So he leaves under the guise of, "I'm just going to put my firearm back in my car." And so, there's reports that people heard gunshots. The guy came back, to complete his date. Well, no, not really. They left because apparently he got uncomfortable and decided they were going to leave. So they went somewhere else to finish the date. But his date decided to have a conscience and called the police and was like, "Hey, some fucked up shit happened."
It sounds like it was one of their first couple dates.
Yeah.
And this is sort of sadly typical of a callous, you could kill.
Well, I think this is a really interesting test of the whole constitutional carry framework, because there was no he wasn't standing his ground. He wasn't under any immediate threat. He had a gun
against an unarmed person.
Yeah. So,
and then in the same state, there was another incident where somebody was shooting in their front lawn.
Oh, and they asked
the neighbors asked him to stop, and then he killed half the people that were there. So it's he literally cited his constitutional amendment or whatever the thing is to be able to do what he wants in his front lawn, which isn't what it gives him the right to do. But people are taking these laws and completely misinterpreting them in ways where now you're ending up with just people getting shot over the scam, whatever, in situations where it's I don't know if there was ever a time in American history where something like that didn't happen that way, but I know at least when I was a kid, it wasn't like that. It was other violence happening, but it wasn't like that. It was different. It was it was more gang violence in white people's minds that was happening when I was a kid. Because, then you go to the places where this supposed gang violence was happening. It wasn't really happening the same way that it was being portrayed on television and, in news stories. So even then, the stuff that we thought or what we were supposed to be thinking was happening wasn't even really happening the same way that it was being shown. So that's where I'm
man, the few people that I've ever met that claimed any kind of gang allegiance were actually the most composed people that I've ever met. They didn't fuck around. The only people that I ever met that behaved like idiots and claimed any kind of gang allegiance probably weren't in gangs.
That's what it usually is.
We have the paradox, I think, in America of this ramping up of the fear, but acting as if we're braver and tougher. Mm-hmm. And one of the coolest things I'd ever heard, and it was surprised me, it was from one of these kind of nut job pro-gun people. He was like, congratulations, you bought a firearm. That doesn't make you smart or tough. That equalizes a playing field. He's like, my grandmother can go purchase a firearm and subdue a 300-pound man. That doesn't make her tough or smart or even brave. It just equalizes a playing field. And it was at least nice that he was vectoring his approach to the people that he knew would hear what he was saying. But seeing this sort of dynamic of like, we need to arm ourselves, go into the Starbucks, right? Versus like, the idea of like, okay, there might be times maybe when one needs to defend himself, but they're very few and far between.
I've seen that old lady at Kroger with like the 357 or the 44 Magnum on her hip, and it's beautiful, like, you know, a true barbecue gun.
Yeah, it's like a barbecue gun.
Ivory handle, like etched barrel. Everything on it looks like it's never been fired. It's definitely a piece of jewelry.
And
a dangerous piece of jewelry.
You're talking about this former military and being around that sort of type. These open carry people baffle me. Even outside, even just briefly remove all the bullshit of their politics out of the equation. It is so tactically unsound to roll into any public place with a firearm out in the open unless you're some sort of uniformed military or civilian cop. Because they don't realize there's like, you know, columns of people. There's the criminal that's going to take him out first, and then there's going to be either cops or soldiers who are trained to, well, threat assessment. Who's going to be the biggest threat in the room when you roll in? And these people who don't have any of these concepts in their head are encouraged by a gun industry, by their churches, by their peers to go arm up. And America, like you said, pew, pew. That terrifies me. You have absolutely no background. I don't hand a knife to somebody who I don't trust. Why would we hand them guns?
At the same time, it doesn't terrify me because they've done the white flight thing. They're so far from everything that you can't get a coordinated group. Like the January 6th thing is about the most coordination you can get from those people. And it was such a clusterfuck that they ended up losing more lives than, like, I think there was like
every one of those of the special interest groups that appeared that has some paramilitary alignment, they lost their leadership. Like the entirety of the Oath Keepers, their entire administration was like essentially jailed because one of the founders.
They all started to turn on each other. It was hilarious.
The first guy, he lived in Indiana. He lived in Columbus. He was the singer for a metal band. He'd been doing this shit for like 30 years. He was worth several $1 million. His band itself was worth several $1 million. They were like on the metal festival tour, like national metal or North American metal tour. Like they were making money. And it's funny because I got really keenly interested in this because this dude's from Indiana, and you know he's from Columbus. That's like down the road from us, and he folded on everyone.
Wow.
That was part of his deal with the state was he turns state's evidence. He becomes a expert witness and all that crap, and then they go lenient on him. But it doesn't matter. No one's gonna pay him to play the guitar again. No one's gonna give him a record contract. No more studio time. No more fancy equipment. No more of the cool stuff that probably actually makes his life meaningful. And I only say that because I love the guitar. I love guitar music. I love music in general, but I really love the guitar. And so the idea of doing something so irrevocably dumb that you could lose that, everything that one has built an entire life to have access to, all of those resources, all of those connections, that network, the ability to create music and perform it for people, gone. Like
the ability to make money by using your fingers on a few fucking
pieces of metal
strings.
Oh God, it's so.
And just shutting the fuck up.
Yeah.
Once again, just using your fingers and shutting the fuck up. That's all you had to do.
And show up and play.
Here we are in 2023, and right-wing social media has lionized Kyle Rittenhouse.
Mm-hmm. What?
He's all over the place, that little Nazi
Still?
cherub. I hate that dude. And then you have, I've forgotten her name, but I remember Ashley, the woman who was shot.
Ashley Babbitt.
Yeah. If she were alive, she would be, well, she is lionized, even though she's dead. And here was my brain, my metaphor, was like in the beer hall pooch in Germany, right? Like for the brown shirts, and they had the blood flag. That's what they have done with her. Yeah. And it's just like, wow.
For the record, fuck that treasonous bitch.
Yeah.
Fucking piss on her grave. I don't even believe in nationalism, but she was like a fucking literal treasonous bitch. So fuck her and her fucking entire memory. Just for the record, fuck Ashley Babbitt. Because that's where I'm like, those people want to lionize the type that are trying to, thinking that you can just go into the Capitol building and sit in the place and then you fucking take it over. That's the type of genius we're dealing with. That's why I'm not fucking scared of them. Because they think that you just, I'm in the White House now, I'm the fucking president. You fucking more, like, that's the type of, I don't even want to call it, like, counterinsurgents, because they're not even that coordinated. Like, we're dealing with the lowest common denominator of stupid, that also they're all right wing. Not to say that there aren't stupid people who identify as Democrats, but this is a special kind of stupid we're dealing with in terms of, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the images, or there's like video of them climbing the Capitol building. It's like the most uncoordinated shit.
It's like
they didn't need to climb it. They could walk around and
walked up the
stairs.
Yeah, that's what kills me. I was thinking, as soon as you said that, the image of, like, there's the steps right next to where you're climbing.
That's people who didn't have a ladder, didn't have a rope, and are trying to climb a facade when there's stairs right there. This is the type of people where they're not going to coup anything. Let alone, like, plan a coup. Because then you find out they were trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan.
Governor Whitmer, yeah.
But they fucking got found out so fast because they were fucking morons.
Well, that group had been infiltrated, like, months before by federal agents.
They had no chance of actually pulling it off.
Speaking of somebody else that's been lionized, and you brought up traitorous bitches. The Air National Guard, Teixeira, I believe is how you properly pronounce his name. He was the guy that he was giving up secrets on a Discord chat group.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is that was probably an insult to a Neanderthal to call her a Neanderthal, was lionizing him. And like you said, it's just like, you guys have no concept, even if I think our country is broken and it only benefits the top. So it's like you are actively going, and then you're going to accuse me of being a traitor.
Here's the thing about her specifically, if it weren't for the fact that she was a senator, she would not have passed the security clearance test. In terms of, like, I've been a character witness for, like, getting security clearance for someone, and there's certain types of things, like, if you've posted on Facebook about, like, anything bad America is gonna do or has done in the past, like, you wouldn't get security clearance if you were, like, a regular person coming up. So the only reason that Teixeira dude didn't get disqualified is because he kept his racism off of Facebook, basically. Like, being racist doesn't disqualify you. It's, have you said any racist things or written any racist things that can be traced back to you, or, like, said anything against America that people have heard, or written anything against America, or if you've, like, cheated on a spouse before, you probably wouldn't be able to get, Like if someone else knew about it, that would like disqualify people. 10 years ago, if you were gay or transgender,
Oh yeah, 'cause you gotta hide stuff.
definitely disqualified. So there's things about like if you have certain parts of your personal life that could be held against you in any way,
That could be compromised.
you
yeah.
wouldn't get fucking security clearance. Knowing Marjorie Taylor Greene's history, she would not have gotten it. So there's this element of people like her and this Tashera dude who are getting it and actually making the security clearance. It's going to be as tarnished as the blue check is because they're going to realize more people like this Tashera dude have it than not. More people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have it than not. So anyone who has it up to this point is going to not necessarily get the same sort of look at their character in terms of passing clearance as they did. Like, the security clearance was behind a curtain, and because people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have it now, she can't keep her fucking mouth shut.
She's always
She
always
can't-
still in secret, so
so
yeah.
She's gonna explain. Just mark my words. She'll tell people everything that it goes, like the process for it, other things that are behind that curtain that she shouldn't be telling. And it's not going to be just her. There's going to be other Republicans who lash out trying to support this Tashera dude. And this is where we're going to see all these people get excised from like having this level of clearance, because it's obviously not a good thing, but we haven't really had an incident like this from the right wing play out because the previous ones have been left wing whistleblowers. So when they blew the whistle and happened to be Democrat, that's when the Republicans like, fuck these people, fuck Chelsea Manning. But now that it's a Republican racist right winger, they're going to be supporting it. But the problem is the institution is actually fairly apolitical. And for as many people like her that have it, it's not actually as political as one would think. And it has to be. Like, this level of keeping separate from the parties is the only way they can actually keep that institution functioning.
But and this feeds the narrative that they're trying to start. It was in Montana. The crowd that supported I don't know if they're called state senators or it's a state Congress in Montana, but they had the trans woman that was in their state legislator. Yeah. Oh my God, they're insurrectionists. And it's just like, you want to jump through the internet, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Literally, people sitting down almost and metaphorically singing Kumbaya, right? I was like, they're demanding to be heard and just literally sitting down. Once again, going back to context and nuance, which they omit. Oh, they didn't barge into the Montana State Capitol. They marched in, they sat down.
Which sit-ins are actually a protected form of protest.
Yeah, and it's like, and all they did was chant and ask for representation. These two are not the same.
Yeah.
And which is another complaint that I often have when you see like that sort of, they try to conflate. It's astounding.
Shit that's happening in France. Like, when similar things were happening in America, it was like demonized. But I think we still have a problem with holding property above certain classes of people in America, and I don't. There's some people who are Democratic views that would be right wing if taken out of context, and a lot of those people are the ones that were like, I'm gonna protect my property during Black Lives Matter, and it's like, motherfucker, you got insurance, and it's like,
yeah, it's property.
Yeah. So when property can be replaced and lives can't, and you have people who are Democrats still trying to protect property, we're not as advanced as we'd like to think. And I think that's just the issue in terms of the reason it was so easy to regress on like LGBTQ issues is like it barely hasn't been 20 years since gay marriage has been legal. Think about that.
Yeah.
It feels like it's been a while, but that's just because it became ubiquitous. But, you know, I know you were in the military during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or I guess pre. Because
I was in right when it shifted over. Yeah.
It was like, we acknowledge that you're there, just don't tell us. That was like seen as progressive at the time because that was left-wing policy.
Yeah,
not left-wing, Democrat policy.
Yeah, good King Bill.
Yeah. So when you have Democrats being like, hey, it's okay with me if you're gay, just don't tell me. That's
it. Well, everybody thought how cool it was back then, but then you got to thinking even back then, well, we already know who they, me being a subculture weirdo, even in the military, like, we knew that, somewhat closeted people anyway. And I was like, wow, they still can't be who they are, right? Like, you can't fully express, they can't, one can't fully express their identity. And well, it's a collective memory loss, and it's sort of a cultural gaslighting. Mm-hmm. And I use this weird analogy of, and often we don't misbehave or quote misbehave. We're all dogs. And when somebody does something stupid or something that somebody doesn't like, we're all of a sudden that particular breed of dog. Oh my God, they're a pit bull. And it's that gotcha game that right-wingers love to play. Oh, this shooter was gay or this murderer. And I'm like, really? Like, you're going there. And, you want to trot out all, like, the other murder statistics or whatever skewing of the statistics are doing. And it's like, come on.
I don't think we can expect... I don't think that there's a genuine response from somebody when they immediately seek some kind of unifying explanation for why something happened. Being gay, being trans, being bullied, these are all factors, but there are too many variables within an individual's existence to summarize it with a couple words and say, oh, it's because of this. Like it was arrived at with some kind of mathematical precision. That's just ludicrous, though. Like, the idea is, oh yeah, we know within 26% certainty that this is the reason that this thing happened. It's correct 45% of the time, 90% of the time.
Yeah, right?
But I just don't think that it's possible to expect reality from anybody who wants to try and boil complex situations down into oversimplified descriptions. That's not how anything works.
Yeah, it's kind of that moment where
simple arithmetic works like that, but
when something bad happens, whether it's a natural disaster or a shooting, and people genuinely unify. I've hit the temperament and age of my life where you see who's operating in good faith versus bad faith, right? Like the idea, if your language might be dated or you have an outmolded concept of what should be versus what is, you can work with things and pick and choose your battles. But I've gotten to also to that point, saying that context and nuance, I don't really give a shit, nor do I wish to engage with anybody who I see is coming out of bad faith, even if they try to say, well, I'm just trying. No, you're fucking not. Don't say devil's advocate with me. Fuck off. And then don't cry, oh, you're fucking intolerant, intolerant left. No, you're a dick. we're done speaking. 'Cause
Devil's
it's all about
advocacy
the bad
isn't
faith.
devil's advocacy. If somebody can actually argue those points and deliver them with authority, they believe that shit. If you don't actually believe something, it's really difficult to really get behind any kind of genuine devil's advocacy. It's like it's an illusion, and we like to dance around the idea of it because it's edgy. But I've never met anyone who could actually pull it off. At some point, there's a reveal. It's like, yeah, I don't actually believe this crap, or they reveal that they actually do believe that crap. It's never like a shallow or shallow slope. It's always like a cliff.
Yeah, and the people, even if they don't, it's sort of that moment on social media when you see it's like, even realizing when people aren't true believers in the edgelord bullshit that they're doing, they're still causing immense amounts of harm to people by their bullshit.
Well, it's not a real position. It's just a constant contrarian identity in terms of like, if someone has a position, then they take one opposing it arbitrarily, which is why devil's advocate people are fucking annoying in terms of like, they don't really have any views of their own ever, and that's all. They just wait for somebody to post something. They're like, well, let me play devil's advocate, and it's like, well, you should go form a fucking opinion of your own first. And I think that's like, to me, why I just, if someone plays devil's advocate all the time, I just don't hang around them and don't talk to them like that. I know people like that, and they annoy the fuck out of me. They really annoy the fuck out of me in terms of like, you can't really have a conversation with them because they constantly oppose you everything. It doesn't even matter what you say. You could be like, oh, I think you're a nice person. Well, let me play devil's advocate. I've done some pretty shitty things. It's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that? Like,
well,
you know what I mean? What the fuck?
Here's a strange example of contrarian edgelord shit. And you guys both know I have a lot of English and Scottish friends. And when the Queen had died, on one of our group chats, the ugly American barges in. Not long, I'm thinking 15 minutes after the announcement was made that the Queen had
Is
died.
his name Nedrick?
No. Nedrick. But just made an ass of himself, and he did not understand the nuance of the people in the chat that were like, you need, shut the fuck up, right? You're talking about you shut the fuck up. It was the Scots in that chat that were like, dude, you need to chill the fuck out. And you know, there is no love lost for the Scots and the fucking Union and the monarchy. But they're like, back up. He fucking doubles and triples down and then fucking cried when the guy running the group bounced his ass out of the group after giving him a fucking lecture about behaving like an obtuse piece of shit. Right? And it's so typical of that. They play fucking martyr.
Yeah.
You know, when you call them out on their bullshit.
Holy crap, that's some rain.
It is.
Yeah, I think it's hailing.
Is it hail?
I think
It is hail.
Oh, it is. Hey, we got some salt, some coarse salt-sized hail.
I saw a weather report that said it looks like possible tornadoes earlier. It definitely
Oh, that's exciting.
looked like on the way over here that it might have a tornado.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
impressive.
Oh yeah, we're right in the middle of something huge right now.
But yeah, like that, curating those people out of your life it's a process.
Yeah.
Which I have really been actively pursuing, and there's more of like a peaceful state of mind. I don't like people like that in my digital world and in my real world, and sometimes those worlds obviously intertwine where my digital and physical people meet. I don't want that around me, and it's like America. It seems to idolize that sort of behavior sometimes.
The obtuse asshole.
Wow, the door is really reacting. The wind indicator is moaning.
Yeah, this is some crazy
Are
weather.
they able to hear the rain through the mics?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Okay, so
yeah.
I can hear it through the headphones.
We got some ASMR effect going on. Kind of cool.
Yeah, it was pretty spot on with the expectation of rain around 3 p.m.
Oh, that's really good.
This is like normal though in terms of this is what this season is supposed to look like.
Yeah, it's finally arriving when
Yeah,
it should.
finally. But it feels like it had been delayed for so long in terms of the winter sticking around. You know, I think it got down to 30 on last week.
Yeah,
last
it
Sunday,
had gotten pretty cold.
which is really late into the year to be getting that cold. Yeah, because there was a frost warning last week. Yeah, there totally was. But, you know, watching the weather patterns change, there were certain years, there were multiple years in a row where it would rain every Tuesday. And then it was like a couple years, it would be every Thursday.
Interesting.
And it's like, well, the only reason I knew is because I had classes those days.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
you
like-
had your rote.
Yeah, when you're trying to go to a fucking evening class and it's like raining, that shit happening every time you're going to class, it's like, oh, it's not just me seeing a pattern. It's like that pattern is there in terms of like, it may be just a seasonal pattern and it may, it's definitely gonna shift, but like I said, for a few years, it was so regular that during this part of the year, it'd be like, oh, it's Tuesday, it's probably gonna rain. And then it was like, oh, it's Thursday. But now it's so unpredictable in terms of like last week on the radar, it's clear and there's no rain forecast, but then a rainstorm just popped up, and which is where I'm like, you know, obviously meteorology is not 100% accurate, and they get a lot more right than any guesswork could ever, but sometimes it's just completely wrong in terms of like the radar is not showing anything, there's nothing on the forecast,
And then boom.
yet there's rain. So I'm like always amazed at how somewhat predictable yet unpredictable these weather patterns are. It's like that is, it's always fascinating. I've always been fascinated by weather, and looking at it as like a whole in terms of like, yeah, when you zoom out, you can see that there's clearly interchanges happening.
That's wind gust activity. So we're right on the threshold of wind gust activity.
Yeah.
And it looks like
There's at least two different systems that converge in our area, which is where like sometimes it'll be blowing northwest to east, and sometimes it blows the other direction, and it's like something happens where the direction like you can see the Gulf Stream that's coming in sometimes shifts to the west, so it like overtakes that wind that's coming in from the west like to the east, and we get a completely different weather pattern than we have right now. But it's like, I don't know if it's solar storms or if it's like something about the rotation of the earth that affects it, but that rotation or that pattern you're seeing now is not always the same, and I'm not sure what changes it. Like, I'm sure someone out there in terms of like a meteorologist or a physicist or something could explain it, but it would take like a physicist to actually explain why that pattern moves the way it does. Like, I wouldn't trust a regular meteorologist that
Yeah,
doesn't
you definitely
understand.
find a specialist or.
Yeah, I'd have to believe that they knew how the rotation of the Earth and solar storms were affecting it, like beyond just observing the weather patterns. Because if you observe the patterns, you could glean something out if you're not also observing the solar storms and the rotation of the Earth, especially like now that we're moving through solstice, like, or I'm sorry, equinox, fucking that
When is the summer equinox this year?
it's the 21st, right? It's like I thought it was supposed to be the 21st every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
There can't be a summer equinox. We would have to have a completely different planetary axial alignment for that.
I'm always like messing up the word solstice versus equinox. It's like, okay, I should know the difference by now.
Well, it's like it's easy to mix up in terms of like equinox is like equal days. Or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
that's
equal,
there. You go. That'll be my way to remember now.
But there's like the perihelion and the solstice in terms of like the distance from the sun. Or,
Yeah, but perihelion doesn't always coincide with summer.
Right,
It can be winter, and we could have perihelion have like an extra bright winter.
It makes me think the official Catholic formula for calculating Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox.
That sounds just as complex as relying on a groundhog.
Right? And it's funny, the formula before that. Well,
Wait, say that again, but at the end, add and bring 2 goats.
no.
Yeah, bring 2 goats.
That's probably already been done, I'm sure.
What are we gonna do? If we can't do goats, I mean, there's Canadian boars are making their way into North America, and they're hardy enough to survive in snow climate, and they are moving south because it's getting warmer, and there are so many snow geese that are eating up all of what available agriculture that they can access without getting shot in Canada. They're moving to the United States because, lo and behold, we've got plenty of agriculture, and the snow geese fly further south than just into the Dakotas.
I wonder how much Canadian boar will just since it's obviously an invasive species. I wonder.
It's going to be the same thing that happened with the boar in Texas. It's going to be open season all year round, most likely, because these aren't stopped by winter.
Yeah.
These things keep going. They burrow. And apparently they're mean.
Oh yeah.
Like I was reading about a farmer got gored by one.
You don't want to fucking be near a boar.
It's so interesting that people don't.
Where there's one, there's at least a dozen.
Yeah.
That either pigs that go feral or feral pigs or boar, which are different. I mean, preaching to the choir. I know you guys know, but a lot of people don't. They're mean and they're smart.
And they have tusks.
Yeah, They are not to be fucked with.
Yeah, and they may not look big, but because of their density and the way that they're just basically like a fucking.
They're a club that can run fast that has sharp
It's
spikes
like
on
a
it.
smarter pit bull, basically.
Yeah, that's yeah.
With knives,
what it comes down to,
in its
yeah.
face.
At least pit bulls. At least pit bulls are smiling bulldozers.
A pit bull, you might be able to like chill out if you give it something to eat and be nice to it.
Well, and those are like. Obviously, pit bulls are all about how well they're trained, but there's this element of them being protective, like in their nature, where like they just might snap on somebody when they're think they're protecting their owner.
Yeah.
But like a boar is like
They'll kill you.
Yeah, but you don't know if you're in its territory or not.
Yeah.
Or what it thinks is its territory if you stumble upon a boar. So it's like you might be in its territory, or so it thinks, and you think you're just out walking or something, and then suddenly it's like...
And that's
The farmer in North Dakota was tending to his farm. So, you know, I'm out doing my thing, then, oh shit! And then wild boar attacks. So, yeah, the question is, how far are they going to invade into the United States? Because if they can thrive in Canadian winter, then
they'll probably get pretty far south.
everything in south of that's going to be cake for them.
Yeah.
This is the land of plenty. There's a grocery store on every corner. They've got nearly unlimited, and just like with wild pigs in Texas, there aren't enough people with guns to shoot them all.
Yeah, and there's enough. I think
in Texas, there's not enough guns to shoot them. I just put that in my head. I was like, there's not enough guns in Texas? That is a sobering thought.
Yeah.
It costs Texas something like $1.6 billion a year in agricultural losses.
Bro, if they can't take on fucking
Pigs.
boars, they're not going to be able to take on the American government. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the entirety of Australia lost not one, but like 2 engagements with emus.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I don't think
I've heard stories about emu. Ooh.
they're fast and they can strafe at speed, like
What?
like a 40-mile-an-hour
was-
like crotch rocket that can
What?
strafe.
Leah and I were explaining to Wade, which is our youngest, in the road of life, do not that he would, because he doesn't antagonize animals, but don't get on the wrong side of a goose. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what? I was like, no, they will hurt you.
Oh,
I mean, they're not going to
they're
like send you to
vicious.
the hospital.
They might.
But, well, actually, yeah, they might.
fucking
There's a
might.
possibility.
Yeah.
Their
I
teeth
mean,
are serrated.
yeah.
No, their tongues are serrated.
But even just getting hit with that bill, I heard, is a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if
They can like pound like just
if there's a group of them and a person is by themselves and the group of geese attacks, that person could definitely go to the hospital.
Right,
and that's
and-
where
and-
it just, if they're like, you know, if it's a child or a person over the age of like 65, easily hospital. And that's where I'm like, it's just
geese,
a matter.
and geese being the smart birded that it is, they have long-term memories. If they don't like you, they remember you.
Yep.
Peacocks are like that. Peacocks are actually excellent guard dogs. I actually had a great aunt that used them on her farm when I was a kid. And they can be mean.
Well, it's like you think of them as being like this nice animal because it has this display, but they're basically like pretty roosters.
But bigger.
Yeah, bigger, pretty roosters, and they will like rush you. Like,
Man, I just read about a JetBlue flight that was forced to land because they got attacked by geese. so I know that airline engines are designed in such a way that, like, they launch frozen chickens into
But
into the
they
engines.
can only take so much.
They can
though.
take like 2 or 3 full frozen chickens before the engine gives out. But it only took 2 geese to take down this JetBlue flight.
Like I said, geese aren't to be fucked with.
Yeah, two live geese versus 3 or 4 frozen chickens. That's my metric now for taking out an airplane.
well,
it only
like,
requires
it
2
depends on what
geese.
part too, because it's
Yeah.
like if they hit the windshield and there's any sort of crack.
Oh, yeah, the pressurization goes.
It's like they gotta get out of altitude immediately. I saw, there's a video of somebody where there's like a crack in the windshield when they're at altitude, and it's like burning through.
Oh, the crack's just like expanding.
Yeah.
Oh, what
And
a frightening thing to
it's
witness.
like just watching the video gives me anxiety, but it's like
Man.
I can imagine being that pilot where you're like, oh fuck, we gotta land immediately, or else like.
Well, at least you have to get to a different altitude so the pressurization doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't know at what altitude it ceases to be a problem.
Well, it really my understanding is the altitude that it becomes a problem. It's actually a temperature issue. It's that it's really cold, really hard cold, like bone piercing cold instantly, and then of course there's no oxygen. So if you could get past the freezing part, you might be able to hold on long enough to pass out. Depressurization, like actual like lack of we're talking about like, you know, in a place where there's just no oxygen too. So even if they had like a helmet that was feeding them air and they weren't wearing a protective garment of some kind, because I'm pretty sure that like military fighter pilots have to wear all sorts of layers of clothing in the event that their cockpit depressurizes, because that's actually a thing that can happen.
Oh,
they're getting shot at.
You see the pressurized suits that some of the
that force blood, just keep blood up in the torso and keep it up in the brain. That's nuts.
I think what was it? What's its number of designation? The SR-71, the Blackbird, which actually flew at the envelope of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Their suits, like you can see them. I think where did I see them? At the Smithsonian? They're insane.
Oh, you can see them at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio.
Yeah, I mean that obviously that plane doesn't fly anymore, but you can see the suits.
The stuff that they've. The images that I've seen of our the flight suits that the current generation test pilots are wearing, it's like straight out of manga. It looks so cool. but at the same time, it's like, man, you got to be crazy to like strap yourself to a freaking Mach 3 plus aircraft and then go for a freaking joyride across the country in an hour. Fuck.
What was it? I think that Blackbird could go across the entire globe in like 2 hours and 12 minutes, something insane. And it's like, wow, that plane used to fascinate me.
Yeah, me too. I think it fascinated probably every young dude.
You're like, wow, that.
I always thought it was cool that like they only filled it with enough fuel to get into the air to the refueling plane, because any more and it would just leak out of the body of the plane because titanium is porous and like it has to heat up before it can actually hold fuel in its tanks.
Like the plates would not there's so much about the plane, like, you know, as a child, you know, like, well,
it's designed to stretch because the fuselage itself, like all the computers and instrumentation are on these like mounting systems that allow it to stretch and not rip itself to pieces as it breaks sound barriers.
The cool part of it not having a weapon system, because they couldn't manufacture or design a weapon system that would work with the plane.
Yeah.
Because it was so fast and so high altitude.
Well, it would rip itself to pieces.
And I
feel like lasers would work now.
Yeah.
That's where we need the high heavy particle like fusion beam action.
Yeah, it's like the only weapon that would work.
I think at its time period there was no weapon on the planet that could hit it. And it was probably fired at. But
because they couldn't fly anything else high enough.
They couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
You'd have to have an extra Blackbird that somehow carried a Sidewinder, and then that could probably catch up to it if it was already traveling at speed.
But I think the missile that would fire at it couldn't get fast enough to get.
You couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
If it was already at speed, though, maybe.
It would be pretty.
It'd probably have like a few seconds of envelope where it could, not even a window, like a mail slot where it could actually do what it's designed to do. It's crazy. Like the Global Hawk. That drone is capable of flying like higher than anything. It flies so high that like it can't even take pictures. Like it has to lower its altitude to take pictures. And it's the kind of thing that, like, that's the reason we don't lose any of them, is because they can just hang out so high up that nothing can get to them.
Yeah,
except for when they come down and take pictures. But that they can get back up to altitude really quickly because, I mean, they're not tiny. These things are the size of fighter jets.
And they're just a full drone.
It's a drone, or a UAV, I think. I don't think drones are actually a thing anymore.
Yeah, because I always wondered when they officially announced that the SR-71 was being decommissioned, that if other technology had made that sort of spy plane idea obsolete.
Oh, of course.
But, you know, my inner child was like, ooh, they got something faster they're not telling us about. But they don't need it. They don't need it anymore.
No.
You know, it's like new era.
I mean, the Chinese delivered a balloon to North America, and our military didn't see it because they had set the radar to filter out objects that could just be seen as noise.
Yeah.
And then they turn it on, and lo and behold, they're like balloons galore. That's like a complete oversight, because I mean, the balloon is, at this point, might as well be considered prehistoric technology.
It's a rock.
But I mean, the balloon that they were using was the size of a school bus. It was like 2 stories tall. It was huge.
Wow.
It was a fully featured research facility in the air. I mean, it's kind of cool. But that's the thing, is these kinds of research tools are fairly common in, like, at the institutional level for groups that are, you know, conducting really serious scientific research. There are balloons that are over the Arctic and Antarctic that are relaying information with like submarine data or buoys, I guess, and some actual research vessels. So this stuff is like, it's not like the technology is obsolete. A balloon makes a lot of sense when you or a blimp, I guess, or a dirigible, or Zeppelin, or whatever you want to call it.
I haven't heard that word. No, I like the word dirigible.
Dirigibles are great, but that's the thing, is like, the technology is ancient. It's prehistoric flight technology at this point, but it's also still viable for things where, like, hey, we don't need this thing to go fast. We just need to keep it in an area, like a 20 square mile area, for a month or two, and we can power it with the sun and solar panels. That's if the response to that is anything other than that's smart, then I'm actually concerned about who's evaluating technology, because that actually is really smart.
Well, and it's that paradoxical moment where, as advanced we get, there's still a need for both the person and the technology to be antiquated sometimes. There needs to be a sort of throwback, and the throwback works.
I mean, I like watches, but, you know, digital watches are cool too.
Yeah, but I mean, the idea that, like, the lattice of its protection got so sophisticated, it didn't even enter the equation. Somebody's just going to fly a low altitude balloon, no matter how fucking big it is.
High altitude balloon.
And then drops, right? Like, because it's what is it called? Its signature doesn't register. Because their threat assessment, they're expecting planes, they're expecting this kind of drone. They're looking for things that were moving quickly and that were large enough that they could actually be a threat. But something the size of a balloon that's floating around, that's clearly an anomaly, right? Yeah.
But it's not. And that's the thing, is that there are satellites, you know, at communications distance, 25,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, that are able to take pictures of the surface of the Earth with accuracy, with detail, like, you know, enough detail to identify what somebody's doing in their backyard detail. And that's incredible. It's not good for, like, real-time support like we envision in the movies, where you got a room full of computer scientists who are actively using hardware to track something and provide intel to some CIA operative. It's not like that. That's more like what Global Hawks are for. But even then, it's not like movies. We can't. The technology exists, but it's not being used that way. I mean, unless they're trying to, you know, hit a convoy with a missile or something.
That's true.
I'm sure that there are some ops where during the actual execution of the operation, they have a team that has a couple of, like, Global Hawks coordinated, so they can keep, you know, eyes from the sky, like, active. But I don't think it's like it was even 20 years ago when, like, AWACS planes were 747 sized monsters. My understanding is now, like, the tech support aircraft that are being used are much smaller. Because there are more air bases, they can operate with smaller ranges. They can be more nimble. They can adapt more easily, and that's just utilizing technology. That's being smart. So in some ways, like, the technology is working. It's working, but then they've got, you know, idiots configuring the fucking radar systems that are letting balloons by. The Chinese could have been sending balloons over the United States for the last decade, and nobody would have known.
We may have, that's probably already happened.
Yeah.
They can deny it all they want. Say, oh, yeah, we know.
Well, yeah,
But it was only a big deal this last time.
It also makes me wonder about, we're looking above and not looking level. Like, what sort of...
Did you know about the Chinese police stations that have been set up all over the world? There's a bunch of them in Canada. There's a bunch of them in the United States. There were Chinese police agents present at the January 6th insurrection.
You know who else did that? New York State Police.
Yeah.
Not
I guess I'm
federal.
surprised, yeah.
Nope.
New York State Police.
Yeah, they have a what is it? They're called a police station in somewhere in Israel, right? Like in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. Like, but I think that was like the first one because they were like working directly with like Mossad because New York was one of the first. New York City was one of the first places to really like get hyper mobilized, obviously because they were the source. They were at the epicenter of the center of the attack, but that stuff is incredible because at one point. New York police was as involved with like Mossad's intelligence network as our own CIA. Like a city level, a metropolitan entity.
There was sort of a precursor to 9/11 that a lot of people forget. There was a guy that was arrested, and it was in the news. It was in the...
Talking about the van bombing?
Yeah, and it was in the basement of the World Trade Center, was it?
Yep.
It was that building specifically.
It created a big orb-shaped cavity in the...
Yeah, when they were talking about to the Arab world...
He was blind too, right?
Yeah, or partially blind. Yeah, something, yeah.
He's definitely like...
That World Trade Center is a big symbol. It isn't just a big building. That was its whole... why it was targeted, right?
But to who?
Yeah.
It's not a fucking symbol of goddamn Muslims.
No, I mean the money of it. They were trying to...
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Bullshit. Muslims don't care about the fucking World Trade Center.
It was,
you know what I'm saying? Like, think about that for a second.
Their money's not made out of buildings.
A Wahhabi Muslim, some random fucking super religious person, oh, the World Trade Center is the fucking center of the devil. No, they don't fucking care about that shit. This is like where I'm looking at propaganda that got fed to the previous generations. It doesn't even make any fucking sense. Like, what American knows enough about the World Trade Center for some random Muslim to make the World Trade Center the point of their ire? And that's what I mean, like, on the one hand, it sounds on paper like some boogeyman shit that would be believable. But when you think about it, like, in reality... Why would they target... I mean, I guess, like, at the time, the UAE wasn't as big as it is now. But you're telling me they're going to target the World Trade Center and not something in an actual, like, Arab-controlled...
Yeah, well, there's...
I don't buy it.
Well, and that's the whole thing about the propaganda is, like, having been around a lot of Arabs for a huge chunk of my life, there was more anger towards the Saudi family. You know what I mean? Than America.
Exactly.
Like, common Saudis did not like the Saudi royal family. And to hear them, and you and I have talked different times about how specifically Arab Muslims deal with their native countries and their governments. And to actually be around these people and to hear their stories and to share yours, and you're like, wow, that's 180 degrees from the shit that is fed to America. Mm-hmm. Like, on so many different levels. And yeah.
Well, I was watching, I mean, we watch old episodes of X-Files all the time, but it's like the way that, like, Arab terrorist was just randomly thrown into storylines and, like, pop culture as far as the way stories were constructed. Do you remember that show 24?
Oh, yeah. Kiefer Sutherland was
I
there,
mean,
right?
that entire show had so much, like, Arab quote-unquote terrorists.
It was propaganda work, for sure.
And then you find out those dudes were played by, like, Cubans or, like, Latinos, and they weren't being played by Arabs, because, like, no Arab wants to, like, throw their fucking people under the bus like that, so they're not taking those roles. And it's the same shit in terms of, like, when you see an ethnicity being stereotypically portrayed, it's often somebody that's like in proximity to them that looks close enough to like them, to like a white person would be able to tell the difference in terms of like if you had like a Vietnam.
They don't like the racists in America don't like Muslims because to them they're Mexicans that they can't underpay.
I mean,
that's probably strangely accurate.
It is,
yeah.
But that's part of it in terms of like,
because their entire exposure is through movies where they're being portrayed by somebody who's not even Middle Eastern.
Yeah. Well, I remember.
I've met Middle Eastern people who look like they're European.
Well,
like, fair-skinned, light hair.
I have had friends that are Jordanian and Syrian that could pass as white folks, right? Like it, and that had always frustrated me. Arab is a spectrum of complexion, right, and complexity in their culture.
But here's the thing: they only changed part of the quote-unquote Middle East to not being Europe when it became Muslim. This is why they still want to call it fucking Constantinople. Because they can't let go.
Yeah.
The white people still call that shit Constantinople. They fucking can't let that shit go.
Who calls it that still?
Bro, there's whole songs.
There's
whole fucking songs.
Oh, man.
I mean, again,
I would curate people who...
I don't have those people in my personal group, but I guarantee you there's some fucking old white people out there still calling it goddamn Constantinople.
And it's probably the same assholes. I've heard.
They're the same people who call Ceylon.
Or South Africa. I've heard South Africa by old people called Rhodesia. Makes me fucking cringe. I'm like, really? You're still going with Rhodesia? Are you fucking serious?
It's that. Those people are still alive.
Yeah. But I remember finally seeing a positive influx of Arab actors coming into film. And it's not the most historically accurate film, but it was definitely a more favorable and honest approach to Salah al-Din, was Kingdom of Heaven. And
that Ridley Scott movie.
And to see Arab actors play complex and nuanced Arab characters in that film was astoundingly refreshing, right? And I remember a lot of my friends were like, "Wow!" But they all also made the joke. This is a funny part. The actress that played Salah al-Din's sister was actually Puerto Rican. But the Arabs that had Salah, they're like,
of course,
they're like, no, she looks Arab, and we're Arab, so yeah, we're cool with her.
Well, but this was all to say, so like if you're in Istanbul, a lot of the Turkish people look European because they are fucking European, and then you only realize, I mean, you don't, not only, but you realize this when you see Arab people in Istanbul and they don't look fucking Turkish. So there's this whole element of like Arab people, and there's certain Turkish people that might have the same skin complexion as some Arab people, but the idea of like there's no Arab skin color, there's no Turkish skin color.
It's a variety. Yes.
But in Western culture, all the Arab people look like Mexicans because they've been played by Mexicans and fucking Puerto Ricans. So this is why we have this idea of like the brown Arab in our American heads, when in fact it's like a wide range. So that's where I mean, like, that's where all to say, if you had a line of Turkish people and a line of Italians, Americans aren't going to be able to fucking tell the difference. I promise you they would not, until they started speaking. You line up a bunch of fucking Turkish young teenage boys and a fucking group of Italian teenage boys, Americans would not be able to tell the difference because they're both fucking European, is what it comes down to.
Well, here we are. I remember as late as the early 2000s, having to tell somebody that a Persian, an Iranian, and now, obviously, ancient Persia is not Iran is not Persia, but they're intertwined, right, because of history and culture, linguistics.
Rome and Italy.
Yeah, right, but I had to tell a person a Persian is not an Arab. Right? Like somebody they love. I was like, Farsi is an Indo-European language. They are different, even though they might share, and even saying a religion, the predominant Islam in Iran is Shia, not Sunni.
They just don't want to accept that the Persians are Aryan.
Yeah, which are literally the Aryan Indo-Europeans.
Because then you can't have the Aryan quote-unquote race without conflating actual Aryans and Arabs, because it's too much nuance for them to actually understand. So that's where, again, it's like you're dealing with people who want things to be spoon-fed and watered down, and when they try to apply these frameworks, they break down because they don't actually hold up. Like,
yeah, well, and you and I love this phenomenon. Not always so. We live in a world where, like we talk about Southern Italians. Their genetic breakup is crazy diverse and cool. And I remember you had years ago, such a strange phenomenon that Italians were given whiteness as like a badge. And like how the phenomenon of it's given and it can be taken away. It is so weird to me. It's like, why does that fucking matter? Yeah.
I mean, because they were doing it within their own, and that's like where the whole what was it, maroon, I think is what, or eggplant. There's like a couple intra-Italian slurs that are meant to be like the dark-skinned Italians.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or like octamaroon or some shit. Like, there's like, but they then started applying them to black people, but that was like intra. I don't even want to call it Italian because it's like, is Sicily, Italy? Not really.
It's like you get into Sardinia,
right? And so there's this whole element of like the southern regions had dark-skinned people because of intermixing at previous points, and then the northern regions didn't. So there was this whole racial, like light-skinned, dark-skinned thing happening already, which then translated into Italian Americans. Like that whole like Guido culture. That's
New York, New Jersey.
Yeah, in terms of like that is super racist against black people, but it's because they're all trying to identify with Northern Italy, and but also taking the tropes of like Sicilian crime. It's like it's actually racist against Italians in the way that the Guido like bullshit actually plays out. Like they're the same thing they do with like not understanding the difference between a French white person and a German white person and a British white person and a Scottish white person. They do with Italian people while trying to claim Italian.
Yeah, that's
and it's like then they end up mocking their own heritage by not truly understanding the nuances, which is not out of line with them. But yeah, there's a whole. And it's even more convoluted knowing that Italy is like only recently an actual country. And I think that's where it really starts to like, I feel like them, and nothing against Irish people, but Irish people lean on nationalism because their identities are so recently constructed as a nation that then when it goes abroad, it becomes like bastardized by the second generation people who like want to lean into it even harder.
There's a definite strong difference if you go into like Boston Irish versus Ireland.
Oh Irish. That's
right?
The perfect example. Right. Because like the Boston Irish, it's like they're doing Irish drag.
That's an incredibly apt analogy. Well,
can we call it cosplay? Because drag can be really fun, but cosplay seems to be this weird thing that it's been taken over by commandos and people that want things to be something that it's not. And cosplay can be fun. I see people do cosplay at like conventions.
I feel like cosplay is too accurate, though. I mean, in terms of like, here's the thing: the more accurate a cosplay, the better it is. Whereas drag is a caricature, and that's where I mean, it's drag. Like, drag is not about female or male. Drag is about caricaturizing, which is why you get drag queens and drag kings. But the drag kings, they fucking stuff their pantses with oversized dildos. They fucking paint on their beards.
Yeah, with sharp pencil.
Yes.
Well, it's meant to be it's a theatrical, over the top.
So it's not whereas cosplay is meant to be as accurate as it possibly can to what it's trying to play. So that's where I mean, like, it's not an insult to call something drag. It's more so it's trying to like express that there's a caricaturization happening, whereas like a cosplay is not trying to. Caricaturizing doesn't necessarily mean mockery, but there's no exaggeration happening in cosplay, in the best cosplay. Whereas like,
but I think the difference is the intent. And,
that's what I mean. And like, drag is meant to exaggerate. It's not like
they're not trying to exaggerate. They're trying.
They are.
They're doing their best to be like.
Which is why you get trans drag queens.
Oh no, I mean the Boston Irish. Is that I think that's like a genuine attempt to do what they think is. It's like the people who latch onto Viking culture. They think that it's something that it wasn't, that it never was.
But that's why I feel like it's an exaggeration in terms of like the thing that they're trying to portray is like this romanticized, glorified version of something that didn't actually exist.
That's why I think it's cosplay. It's like the steampunk people who dress up like that.
That's the same thing that happens with drag people in terms of like the way like a drag queen exists. It's like they're doing their mother or their aunt that existed in their mind, not the aunt that actually existed in real life. Which is where I'm saying like the idea of Ireland or Irish people that these Boston Irish have in their mind is a romanticized version that they're trying to aspire to be that didn't actually exist.
Here's a brilliant example of that in real time. I can't remember the dude's name, but I saw a video blog.
Is it Jordan Peterson?
No, not at all. This cat of Norwegian descent is in like Wisconsin or Milwaukee. You know, one of those states where you got all the Nordic. He finds out that he's mostly Norwegian. He goes to Norway. And the dude is super Christian, he's super capitalist, and he's vlogging about this. And he's going to go see the land of his people. They're going to be just like him.
Nope.
He vlogs his experience of basically losing his religion. Because the Norwegians, he finds, a lot of them are diehard socialists. They're very left-wing.
They're Norway. What did he expect?
They're very socialist, right? His boom just falls apart. And I'm like, I was gleeful, like the German word, schadenfreude.
Yeah.
It's like, right, like, well, dude, you had that coming, right? You should have done real research of, I have no illusions. Like, the Scottish side of my mother's side of my family, we came from a bunch of psychotic hilljacks, right? Like, and even the term hillbilly is a Scottish term. It's taken from, and it's like, they are what they are. The modern version is not the ancient version. And I wish people would get that. It's like, I've noticed you never see any Italians go, well, we're Romans.
Right.
Like, no, you're not, right? Because,
I think Americans are the modern Romans.
That we're in the imperial side of Rome for sure.
We're definitely, America is where the Romans ended up. They got to England. They get pissed off the locals. The locals eventually formed a country. They got kicked out. They came to America.
Was there a Roman race? That's what I mean. Like,
no, it's an identity.
There's not enough of them. They were such an amalgamation.
It's a culture. It's a culture, and it's a cultural identity.
That was from Rome.
That was constructed.
But
this is again that notion
it had It had Germans before they were called Germans.
Germanic
it had Gauls.
tribes.
Yeah,
They're not even Germans, they're Germanic tribes.
Yeah, before they were Germany, they had Germans, right? Like they had the Gauls, which were Celtic French people, for lack of a better nomenclature.
Yeah.
Right?
Which French people still latch on to that connection to this day with Asterix and Obelix, which is like...
I thought that was a Belgian cartoon.
No,
well, to be fair, the Belgians, there's that part of the wall. You have the Walloons and the Flanders, right? The French and the... Yeah, it's
don't they speak French in Belgium?
In the southern part, Walloon, the Walloon Belgians.
There's like a whole region of France that's basically German, and it's like in the Alsace-Lorraine, like eastern.
Well, not always so, right? People don't consider this. In northeast Italy, they celebrate Krampus because even though they're technically in the border of Italy, they're not Italian. They are, but they are not. Not always so, right? Shit breaks the rules.
Yep.
Like,
I wonder how much of like the Alpine countries, how unified their culture actually is compared.
It's very fluid up there, which again, that's where it's like, you go to one part of France and it might as well be Germany or Switzerland.
Yeah.
Because
it's an Alpine portion of France.
Well, and there's that one.
And that defines it more than the nationality.
The geography.
There's a culture in southern France that was brought up heavily in the film The Brotherhood of the Wolf. And at first I had mistook them as Roma, but there's something else, and I can't remember the name.
I mean,
and it sort of breaks the model of.
There's a ton, and I think that's why, like, okay, I've been to France a few times, and like, the first time I went, I don't know what to ethnically call them, but for lack of better term, gypsies were everywhere. And it was like a problem for the French people that they were trying to address without looking racist. So they were like, because the issue was like, okay, you go to like Notre Dame, and like gypsies would be, like I said, I don't know what to call them, because they would call themselves gypsies at the time.
Yeah,
like,
they have.
So
I think now it's they tend to prefer traveler or Roma.
Right.
Yeah.
And which again, it's like I don't know what the like because they're not the same kind as the ones that are in Britain.
I hate the word, but they have self-identified as pikeys.
Pikeys, right? They're the ones in the pikeys.
Snatch, but they're real.
No, they're real.
No,
Tyson Fury's a pikey, so they have like, which is funny that Tyson Fury's an actual pikey boxer,
soccer player too, right?
I mean,
I think he started out life as a soccer player.
But his more success in the boxing. Regardless, the pikeys are not the same as the Roma gypsies, and like if you go to
they're different tribes and clans, right?
Oh
like,
yeah.
And it's,
but completely different cultures.
Yep.
And
Sorry,
like
I just
their
left for that
presences are different. So like seeing that in France in different times, like whatever they did, their presence is not as ubiquitous now as it used to be, in terms of like they were super visible in the 90s. Now they're not as like present in terms of like going out in the park or wherever and just them being there. But I don't know if that's because they assimilated or because they got kicked out. I'd have to do more research. But again, those people existing the way that they did, it was like, if you didn't see it in person, it would be really easy to exaggerate it and then turn it into something that is like, I guess, the way quote-unquote gypsy cultures have been described as being like this, like almost like a parasite instead of a symbiote, right? Like, if you only look at certain parts, it's definitely going to look like a parasite. But when you interact with it, it's way different. So that's where I'm like, I can understand, like, having seen shit in person, when you then see it from afar, it can become even more exaggerated or stretched from the reality of the situation.
I remember when you had traveled to Scotland and you and I had talked about, even before you had left, the difference in personality from the really obvious low-hanging fruit to the subtle between the English and the Scots.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like Americans often don't differentiate those two cultures. Yeah, they're on the same island, and it's nuanced. Yes, they speak the same language. They have the same genetic background. They're not the same. Mm-mm. At the end of the day, they are not the same. And that's, like you had said, you go to Germany, how a German behaves in Dusseldorf is different than Dresden or Stuttgart, right? Like, but yet, homogenized American brain, everybody acts the same.
Yeah. Well, that's like, okay, I've only been to a couple of places in Germany, but the Wiesbaden that we went to, there was like a ton of visible Turkish people, whereas when you go to Berlin, they're there, but they're not as like visible in their presence because there's more other people to like occlude it. So there's like a big population of Turks there, but you wouldn't necessarily notice them until you go to a place where they're more present, like, or they become more visibly part of the population. And it was like, even, you know, there's black people and shit like that, but somebody who is like romanticizing Nazi Germany, if they went to Germany, they would not. That's not even remotely. And that's what I was getting at in terms of like, there are these things that when they're presented a certain way, certain elements of it are true in terms of like, when I went to France, like, and I don't, like I said, travelers were everywhere, and they were not the pikey because they were dark skinned, but not as dark skinned as me. So there was this like, I would assume they were Roma because they were darker olive skinned, not really speaking Greek, but this is like this presence that then when it's presented in other media, it's like much more exaggerated than what you encounter. And that's where like, if I hadn't seen it for myself and encountered somebody who had seen it and was non-discerning, they would probably reinforce those stereotypes. Yeah. And I think that's where, if you go to Germany, if you go to Berlin, there's still remnants of Nazi Germany in terms of like the things that they're preserving to like not destroy that part of history, but it's not the part of the city that is still alive in terms of like, there are very many non-ethnically German people in that city, just everywhere, existing, being German. Yeah. And that's where they're not from a Germanic tribe, but they're German.
Yeah, well, and that is a beautiful point that I had been kind of stewing in my brain about this, the idea we live in a world now where, say, a white person is born in Japan and is born and raised in Japan. They are culturally Japanese. Yeah. Are they ethnically? Absolutely not. It's a nuanced thing, right? And it goes the other way. Somebody who is Japanese that is born and raised in Scotland, they are a Scot. Mm-hmm. That's the way. And one of the beautiful things I think of the world that can work is that when people realize culture and genome are, and we obviously know they're very different things, but so many people can't wrap their mind around that. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, like you said, the sort of melting pot of where Britain is, you know, running into Scots, when you see like a Sikh, right, an obviously Sikh person, soon as they speak, their accent is Glasgow. Mm-hmm. Right?
Culture is a fluid continuum that we're all supposed to be able to navigate, but some people are like what's a very viscous fluid. They're like ice.
Yeah.
They're not mutable. They can't get past the local culture. So, like I try to blend into local Hoosier culture because it's fun. Because there's some parts about Indiana that are actually pretty fun, like tenderloin sandwiches. Mm-hmm. I love those things. You can't get a a Hoosier style tenderloin anywhere outside of Indiana. You just can't. It tastes different. They don't flatten it right. The breading's wrong. All the things are messed up. I could go on, but that's the thing. Like, some people will never, transcend their local culture. Some people can fluidly navigate the differences between regional cultures. Some people can travel all around the world and be at home, no matter where they are, because they can navigate the dynamics of cultural interaction. Like, I'm half Han Chinese, but I'm 100% American in the sense that I don't know what it's like to actually be Chinese. I only know what I've read and the translations that I've been told. But I definitely know what it's like to be American because I live in this culture. I also feel like I can fluidly navigate the differences between like country life and city life. I'm comfortable in an airport. Not everyone can even go close to an airport. Some people are terrified of planes.
Yeah.
I'm not, but I'm also terrified of spacecraft. So like I have an there's a ceiling to how far up I want to get or how far away from the surface I want to get.
I'm terrified of untested craft.
Yes.
That is a fair
like Starcraft or Starship that blew up.
I don't want to be on a plane's inaugural flight, let alone a Starship's inaugural flight. Like,
if this is an untested craft, I'm not getting on it.
Nope. Let somebody else do the fucking first flight.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Radio
shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.